For most of her life, the world believed Dame Judi Dench was made of light. We saw the national treasure, the gentle grandmother of cinema. A woman carved from grace so rare that even her critics spoke of her with softened voices. But at 90 years old, as the curtain falls on a legendary career, a shocking truth has finally slipped through the cracks. The woman we thought forgave everyone, actually forgave nothing. This isn't about a single bad day. This is a cold, calculated list. Kenneth Branagh, Maggie Smith, Harvey Weinstein, Daniel Day-Lewis, Steve Coogan, Richard Eyre, 6 titans of the industry, 6 specific wounds, and 6 people she quietly but permanently erased from her creative life. The question is not what they did to her. We've heard the rumors. The real question is, what pushes a woman of infinite patience to finally say, enough? How does the kindest soul in Hollywood transform into a figure of absolute, unyielding steel when the cameras stop rolling? It is absolutely heartbreaking to imagine the quiet pain she must have carried behind that smile. Welcome to the story behind the silence. We are peeling back the layers of a legend to reveal the cost of disrespect. This is not just a list of names. This is an investigation into dignity. This is The Velvet Mask Cracks. Time carries a strange gift. It reveals what a lifetime of good manners can hide. For decades, Judi Dench was the elder of the stage who could turn an entire theater silent with nothing more than a breath. She was the anchor, the professional, the one who endured. But as she stepped into her 90s, the edges softened, the expectations loosened, and she allowed us to see the scars she had been hiding under long sleeves for half a century. The reveal did not come as bitterness. It came as clarity, a kind of late-life honesty that felt less like a confession and more like a liberation. According to intimate accounts from those who have worked near her, she never chased revenge, she never wished harm, but she possesses a memory like a steel trap. She remembered every moment someone spoke to her as if she were smaller than the roles she carried. She remembered every time she was treated as lesser than the mastery she had spent decades refining. The public saw the sparkle. They never saw what dimmed it. In quiet interviews and passing reflections, she began sharing stories that sounded almost unreal. Moments where even titans of the industry faltered in the presence of their own enormous egos. A young prodigy who corrected her publicly. A world-famous actor who slipped so deeply into character he could not look her in the eye. A colleague whose single snap cut deeper than years of rivalry. Each name on her list carried its own shadow. Each moment carried its own bruise. And as she spoke, something remarkable happened. The pristine portrait the world had painted of her didn't break, it sharpened. The elegance remained, but now it had weight. The patience remained, but now it had a spine. Let's examine the 6 names that tested that spine, starting with the golden boy of British theater. But be warned, the first cut is always the deepest. In the early 1990 seconds, their names were spoken together like a promise. Judi Dench and Kenneth Branagh. 2 generations of British theater fused into one electric force. To audiences, they were the perfect pairing, the seasoned master and the rising prodigy who admired her with an almost reverent intensity. Their early collaborations felt effortless. They were shaped by genuine mutual respect. But respect is a fragile currency. One careless moment can bankrupt it forever. The incident happened in a rehearsal room, the kind of sacred space Dench had ruled with quiet command for decades. The cast gathered, scripts open, the hum of lights overhead filling the silence. Dench arrived as she always did, with her lines meticulously broken apart and rebuilt, an alchemy she had honed through years of discipline. She carried the work in her bones. Branagh, however, arrived with something else entirely. He was riding the meteor of sudden fame. He had momentum, he had confidence. And, as some described, a growing impatience with anything that slowed the pace of his creation. The fracture came without warning. Dench offered her interpretation of a key scene, shaping the rhythm of the language with the elegance that had defined her entire career. Before she could finish, Branagh cut across her explanation. He offered a correction, not quietly, not gently, but in front of the entire room, He suggested she trust the spontaneity of youth. The phrase was delivered briskly, almost flippantly, as if he had momentarily forgotten the years she had spent perfecting every single breath of Shakespearean cadence long before he was born. A stillness settled over the room, not dramatic, but devastating. Dench did not argue. She did not raise her voice. According to those present, she simply lowered her script and held his gaze with a calm so controlled it seemed to darken the light around her. It was the look of a woman who had endured countless notes but rarely a public dismissal, especially from someone she had championed. From that moment, the atmosphere changed. He pushed for speed. She pushed for precision. He embraced improvisation. She anchored the text with craft. Their exchanges turned clipped. Their silences grew heavy. And what stung most wasn't the disagreement itself. Judi Dench never feared challenges. She feared arrogance. She feared the moment a collaborator forgets the cost of mastery and believes rising talent outranks earned wisdom. After the project ended, she made her decision quietly. No public quarrel. No whispers of betrayal. She simply stepped back. Invitations to reunite were deflected. To the public, the partnership faded naturally. But to Judi Dench, it ended the moment respect slipped. The prodigy she once admired had crossed the one line she never allowed. He confused brilliance with superiority, and in her world, that was unforgivable. But if Branagh's sin was arrogance, the next name on the list committed something far colder. If Kenneth Branagh suffered from too much ego, the next name on the list suffered from too much immersion. Daniel Day-Lewis enters any room like a storm disguised as a whisper. He is the actor whose devotion to the method transformed him into a legend. Judi Dench admired him long before they met. She admired the discipline, the daring, the fearlessness. But admiration is not the same as compatibility. When they finally worked together, their philosophies collided like two worlds built on opposite laws of gravity. According to accounts from the production, the tension didn't begin with a fight. It began with silence. His silence. Dench arrived to rehearsals grounded, clear-eyed, and respectful of the craft. She believed in preparation, but she also believed in humanity. Daniel Day-Lewis, by contrast, arrived as someone else entirely. He walked, spoke, and breathed as his character. He did not break, not even to greet the woman standing across from him. At first, Dench tolerated it. She understood commitment. But as days passed, the silence grew louder. The distance hardened. The room began to feel as if she were sharing a set with a ghost, wearing another man's skin. The defining moment came one morning when she approached him with a thought about their shared scene. She spoke gently, offering a suggestion based on her decades of experience. He turned toward her, not as Daniel, not as a colleague, but as the fictional figure he inhabited. His response belonged to a world inside the script, not the world of two actors building a performance together. It wasn't hostility. It wasn't defiance. It was dismissal, and it unfolded in front of the entire crew. A micro-crack formed. Small, but unmistakable. As some describe, she carried on with her signature grace, but the light in her eyes dimmed just slightly. She delivered her lines with meticulous control, yet between takes she stood alone, hands folded, waiting for a flicker of recognition that never came. Communication, one of the pillars of her process, had evaporated. The breaking point arrived during a difficult emotional exchange. Dench, always deliberate, wished to explore pacing and intention before the cameras rolled. Day-Lewis refused, insisting the truth could only emerge in the heat of an unbroken take. She listened, she nodded, and she said nothing. But inside, something settled. A decision, a boundary. For Judi Dench, acting was not a solitary pilgrimage. It was communion, two imaginations meeting in the space between breaths. What she encountered instead was isolation wrapped in genius. After the project, she praised his talent publicly, as she always did. But in private, she stepped away, quietly, permanently. Not because he was difficult, but because he made her feel invisible in a room where visibility is the soul of creation. Daniel Day-Lewis vanished into his characters. And somewhere along the way, he vanished from her trust. But while Day-Lewis disappeared, the next person on the list made sure their presence was felt in the most painful way possible. This next name is perhaps the most painful. To the public, Judi Dench and Maggie Smith were eternal companions, two reigning queens of the British stage whose laughter echoed through decades of shared admiration. They appeared inseparable. But even the strongest bonds can fracture in a single moment. Their story did not begin in tension. It began in excitement. A major West End production had brought them together, two titans, two master craftsmen. Rehearsals buzzed with anticipation. Cast members whispered that this pairing might redefine the production. For a time, it did, until the day everything shifted. Maggie Smith entered rehearsals exhausted. Her steps were quick, her humor sharp, sharper than usual. The pressure was relentless. Interviews, expectations, the weight of being a national treasure. Judi Dench, by contrast, arrived steady and grounded, shaping scenes with her characteristic patience. Their methods, once complementary, began brushing against each other. The moment that cracked the friendship came during a pivotal two-person scene. Dench paused, as she often did, to explore an emotional beat, just a slight shift in timing, a question about the rhythm of the exchange. A normal request, a harmless one. But that afternoon, the room felt stretched thin, as if one spark could ignite a fire. Smith snapped, not loudly, not cruelly, but sharply enough to freeze the air. Short pause. If you want to direct the play, Judi, just say so. Dumb. It wasn't the words themselves, it was the tone, the flash of impatience, the implication that Dench's care was an intrusion rather than craft. The room fell silent. Scripts lowered. Eyes darted toward the floor. Dench stood absolutely still. She didn't argue. She didn't defend. She didn't return the sting. She simply inhaled, blinked once, and resumed the rehearsal with a smile, so composed it felt like a curtain drawn over a wound. But something in the atmosphere had shifted permanently. From then on, their camaraderie thinned. Smith leaned into humor with edges that cut too close. Dench responded with politeness wrapped in coolness. What had once been ease became a delicate balance, a dance of distance neither acknowledged aloud. Backstage, whispers spread through the company. People wondered if two giants had finally collided, but Dench never allowed the tension to spill into the public. She thanked the cast, praised the production, and exited with grace. Yet privately, she made a choice she rarely reversed. She would not return to a room where respect had faltered, even once. In later years, she spoke of Maggie Smith warmly, kindly because kindness was her nature. But the affection that once softened her words had vanished, replaced by something measured, something distant. Two queens stood on the same stage. Only one walked away unchanged. But if Maggie Smith's words were sharp, the next man used humor like a knife. Steve Coogan was never supposed to be part of Judi Dench's private list. Their worlds barely touched. He was the razor-edged satirist, she the emblem of classical gravitas. Yet when a high-profile project paired them together, something unexpected surfaced. Not scandal, not argument, but a quiet bruise that Judi Dench never forgot. At first, she welcomed the collaboration. She admired Coogan's timing, the way he could twist a line with surgical wit. She valued intelligence in any form, and comedy, real comedy, required a sharp mind. But wit can become a weapon when used carelessly. The fracture emerged during one of the earliest rehearsals. Dench, ever devoted to the emotional architecture of a scene, asked the director about a character beat. It was not a debate. It was a question, simple, thoughtful. Before the director could speak, Coogan leaned back with a smirk that drew polite laughter from the cast. Judi, the audience isn't writing a thesis. They'll survive if the line is just funny. The air did not freeze. It thinned. Dench raised her eyes slowly. She wasn't offended by humor, she adored humor. What she could not abide was the implication beneath it. That depth was pretentious. That her careful shaping of a moment was unnecessary. That her craft was an inconvenience to someone else's spontaneity. From that point onward, the tension grew. Coogan improvised through scenes, shifting tones, bending rhythms. dancing around the lines she had prepared with discipline. He brushed off feedback casually, confident in his instinctive brilliance. Meanwhile, Dench waited, script in hand, back straight, listening for the moment the room settled enough for real work to begin. The breaking point arrived during a rewrite session. Coogan, in a tone meant to be playful, suggested cutting one of her monologues to avoid lecturing the audience. The laughter that followed was brief. Dench did not join in. She simply closed her script, looked directly at him, and remained perfectly, devastatingly, silent. That silence ended the collaboration long before the cameras stopped rolling. When the project wrapped, she offered him no criticism and no praise. In interviews when his name surfaced, she answered with neutrality so precise it became its own verdict. For Judi Dench, disrespect didn't always arrive as cruelty. Sometimes it arrived wrapped in charm, sometimes it arrived disguised as a joke. But its impact was the same. Comedy may forgive everything. She did not. But if Coogan was careless, the next man on the list was calculating. Through the late 1990s and early 2000s, Judi Dench navigated Hollywood with the same quiet steadiness she brought to every stage she ever touched. She was admired, sought after, and respected. But among the influential figures she crossed paths with, one name stood out not because of friendship, but because of a single exchange she never forgot. Harvey Weinstein. Their professional relationship, at least publicly, appeared smooth. He championed several films she appeared in, praised her work with a grandiose admiration. But Dench, who valued autonomy above all else, sensed early that Hollywood operated with its own hierarchy, one that did not always align with her belief in mutual respect. The tension began not with conflict, but with pressure. Weinstein was known for aggressive awards campaigns, and he expected absolute cooperation. Dench, however, had spent a lifetime choosing her own path. She refused to become a product. The moment that marked her permanently came during a private meeting in his office. She questioned a publicity strategy that she felt misaligned with the spirit of the work. The room was dim, crowded with posters and trophies. A shrine to power. Weinstein leaned back, folded his hands, and offered a remark that shifted the air instantly. "Judi, leave the thinking to us. You just show up." It was not shouted. It was not dramatic. But it was dismissive deeply, unmistakably dismissive. Dench froze. She had been spoken to as if she were an accessory to her own craft, a participant without agency, a performer stripped of thought. For a woman who built her legacy on intelligence, the line cut sharper than any criticism of her work ever had. She ended the meeting quickly. No confrontation, no raised voice. Her refusal was quiet but absolute. She tightened the boundaries of their professional interactions. She ensured that her schedule and her integrity remained her own. When allegations about Weinstein later became public, Dench expressed shock and sadness, as many did. But privately, according to those who knew her well, her reaction held a clarity she had earned decades earlier. That single meeting had given her a glimpse into a power dynamic she wanted no part of. She had trusted her instinct, protected her dignity, and stepped away long before the world understood the full picture. She never spoke of him unkindly. She never dramatized the story, but she never allowed him to speak to her that way twice. But if Weinstein tried to own her image, the final man on the list tried to own her soul. We arrive at the final name. Richard Eyre was a man Judi Dench had trusted for years. Together, they crafted performances that critics held up as proof of British theatre's golden age. Their partnership was built on mutual intelligence, his sharp vision, her instinctive depth. But respect, once fractured, rarely repairs itself. Their final project together was a prestigious London production that demanded emotional precision. Dench entered the rehearsal room in full command of her craft. Eyre arrived with his own philosophy: absolute control. Every gesture, every pause, every shift in breath had been mapped long before actors ever stepped into the room. For some performers, that structure offered safety. For Judi Dench, it was suffocation. At first, she tried to adapt. She followed the marks, honored the rhythm, worked within the frame he had drawn. But as rehearsals progressed, the boundary between direction and domination blurred. Eyre corrected timing that didn't require correction. He pressed for symmetry where she sought truth. Slowly, the room began to feel like a cage built from meticulous notes and immovable expectations. The breaking point arrived in a private rehearsal, quiet, focused, intensely still. Dench suggested a subtle adjustment to the pacing of her monologue, believing it would deepen the emotional weight. It was a measured idea, shaped by decades of understanding exactly when an audience's heartbeat should quicken. Eyre shut it down instantly. No discussion, no curiosity, just a flat, dismissive, "Just follow the map, Judi." The words hung in the air like a dropped curtain. Dench did not argue. She simply stared at him, script pressed lightly against her chest, as if absorbing not the instruction, but the tone. It was the tone one might use on a novice, a beginner, someone still finding their confidence. Not on her, not on Judi Dench. From that day forward, rehearsals shifted into a quiet tug-of-war. She sought nuance. He sought structure. She created from instinct. He enforced from blueprint. Crew members later recalled how she would stand alone after note sessions, weighing not the notes themselves, but how much of her essence she was willing to compromise for someone else's design. When the production ended, the world saw brilliance. But Judi Dench made her decision with the same dignity she brought to every stage. She walked away. No statements, no accusations, just absence. The partnership had ended through a single moment when she was made to feel like an intruder in her own craft. And for Judi Dench, that was the one thing she never forgave. 6 names, 6 collisions, 6 moments that quietly redirected the course of a legendary life. When people speak of Judi Dench, they often speak in absolutes, her warmth, her grace, her unmatched command of language. But the truth that emerged in her later years is far more intricate. Behind every elegant performance lay a private constellation of wounds that shaped the woman the world believed they understood. These weren't just feuds, they were lessons. Kenneth Branagh taught her that brilliance cannot excuse arrogance. Daniel Day-Lewis revealed the loneliness of unchecked immersion. Maggie Smith exposed how fragile even the strongest bonds can be. Steve Coogan demonstrated the sting hidden inside casual humor. Harvey Weinstein showed the danger of power without respect. And Richard Eyre proved that brilliance can darken when it forgets humility. Together, these lessons created a quiet evolution. She no longer said yes to every role. She no longer excused behavior that undermined her craft. She began prioritizing rooms that honored dialogue, directors who welcomed instinct, and co-stars who understood that mastery is not a hierarchy, but a meeting ground. What the world misinterpreted as saintly patience was actually disciplined discernment. Judi Dench did not endure disrespect to keep a reputation polished. She endured until the moment she realized the cost of staying outweighed the grace of leaving. Her legacy was not shaped by the roles she played alone, but by the lines she refused to cross. It was not defined by who she worked with, but by who she left behind. In the twilight of her career, Judi Dench did something unexpected. She spoke with a clarity that felt both tender and devastating. She shared these stories not to settle scores, but to illuminate a simple truth. She forgave misunderstandings. She forgave exhaustion. She forgave the pressures of fame that twisted even the gentlest souls. But forgiveness has limits. And Judi Dench learned where those limits lived. She never walked away in anger. She walked away in understanding. Understanding that some people were not meant to share her space. Understanding that silence is sometimes the loudest boundary. Understanding that leaving a room can be the most powerful way to reclaim it. As age softened her presence but sharpened her honesty, she invited the world to see the woman behind the legend. Not flawless, not endlessly patient, but fiercely protective of the craft that shaped her entire life. And in the end, she leaves us with a question lingering in the air, quiet, cinematic, and unanswerable. Was she walking away from those 6 names? Or was she finally walking toward the version of herself she had always been? A woman who knew her worth. A woman who remembered everything. A woman who forgave much, but never at the cost of her dignity. Now, I turn the question to you. Of the 6 names on Judi Dench's blacklist, from the arrogance of youth to the abuse of power, which one do you think committed the unforgivable sin? Was she right to cut them off, or is forgiveness the only true grace? Let me know in the comments below. And if you think Judi Dench's story is heartbreaking, this is just the beginning. Hollywood is full of silent struggles that the cameras never show. If you want to be the first to uncover the hidden truths behind the world's biggest stars, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. You won't want to miss who we investigate next.